Welcome to this short video on piece tracking with part traceability functionality inside of Infor Visual ERP. This is presented by Simplify Solutions LLC. For my example, I'm going to be creating a dimensional part called wood that will be going into a table assembly later on. Here you can see that I've set up my dimensional items underneath the piece tracking tab within part maintenance. I'm keeping the example simple by only choosing length in this case. I could also have chosen width as well as height to be put into the requirements. Next, we can go over to Part Trace Profile Maintenance. Inside of Part Trace Profile Maintenance, I'm going to go through and select my part ID. Then I'll enter a label as well as put in an additional comment so we know what we're tracing at this point. On the right-hand side is where I can select which process I want to apply the trace profiles. And here you'll notice that I'm going to select an auto numbering, and there's multiple auto numbering capabilities. And you can see the one I set up for the wood products for right now. On the bottom, you can either choose alpha or numeric properties to also be entered during the trace recording process. You can allow editing of the expiration date. You can do pre-assigned numbers. You can also put days and limits on the trace. Next, I'll go over and add in some inventory transactions using inventory transaction entry. I'm going to choose adjustment in. I'll select my part ID. And down below, I'll put in the transaction details. Here's where you can see the location, as well as the number of pieces I'm adjusting in and the length of those pieces. If I try to save the transaction at this point in time, you'll notice that I'll get some warnings about the traceability not being set. So let's go over and do the part trace entry. And my setup included auto entry of the numbering. So all I have to do at this point in time is close the trace properties, and the properties will be assigned automatically to my transaction. Now I can save the transaction. We can now move over to the inventory pieces dialog. And here's where you'll notice the transaction that we put in and the quantities that are going to be out there for our dimensional part. We can also review the details of the trace information inside of Part Trace Maintenance. I'll go in and I'll select my profile ID, and here's where you'll notice the trace transaction of 500 units has been adjusted in. Next, I'd like to show an example of issuing our dimensional part with trace details to a work order. Opening my fabricated work order that's going to be using our dimensional part, and I'll open up the requirement card, and you'll notice that the requirement is going to be a quantity of 2 per for this part, and it's going to use the length that we've already specified of 50. From here, I'm going to go over to the inventory transaction entry. And inside of inventory transaction entry, it's going to come up with issue, and you can see that it requires 2 pieces. Down in the transaction details, I'm going to put in the 2 pieces that I want. I'm going to specify my trace properties, and it's going to use 100 at this point in time with my wood trace ID, and I can save this transaction. I'll move over and I'll show you the dimensions is now reduced by 2 units, and it's now 8 pieces are remaining at that length of 50. I can also go over to Part Trace Maintenance, select my profile, and you will now also be able to see the 100 trace parts being moved here or issued. I can go further and look at the details. The dialog shows you the inventory transactions for both the adjust in and issue transactions. Thank you for watching this short video on piece tracking with part trace functionality inside of Infor Visual ERP. This has been brought to you by Simplify Solutions LLC.